Tonight we slip into a world of glowing furnaces, molten rivers of fire, and secrets whispered in the flicker of orange light. You stand at the edge of a lagoon, the salty air brushing your cheeks, as gondolas bob in the dark water. Across from you, Venice glitters, a carnival of marble palaces, bell towers, and canals that mirror the moon. But you are not staying in that dreamscape city tonight. You are headed to Murano, a small cluster of islands nearby, where the air always smells faintly of smoke and alchemy. The year is centuries ago, and you probably won't survive this job. Not because of the heat, you'll get used to singed eyebrows, but because Venice guards its glassmakers like a dragon hoards its gold. Escape? Almost impossible. Betrayal? Fatal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a narrow bridge and find yourself amid the workshops of Murano, a place exiled from Venice yet bound tightly to it. Why? Because fire is dangerous, and Venice is a floating city made almost entirely of wood. You can imagine one spark leaping from a glass furnace onto a gondolier's oar, and suddenly, goodbye Venice. The government had no patience for that kind of disaster. So, in the late 13th century, the Republic decreed that all glassmakers must move their furnaces to Murano. Officially, it was fire safety. Unofficially, it was also brilliant control. Keep the artisans close, keep the secrets closer. The law wasn't a suggestion, it was ironclad. Picture this: you're a talented glassmaker in Venice proper, living above a canal-side workshop. One morning, a bailiff in crisp Venetian robes shows up, tells you the Senate has decided your fire is too risky, and suddenly you're told to pack up. Your tools, your apprentices, even your family, all loaded onto a barge and ferried to Murano. No argument, no appeal. And once you're there, you're not leaving without permission. You belong to Murano, as surely as your molten glass belongs to its furnace. The strange thing is, Murano didn't start out glamorous. At first it was just a marshy island, dotted with monasteries and vegetable gardens. But once the glassmakers arrived, the place transformed into a fiery jewel. Night after night, the furnaces glowed so brightly that sailors navigating the lagoon used them as beacons. Imagine standing on deck and seeing Murano's skyline shimmering like a false dawn. Romantic, yes, but also a neon sign saying, "Here is where Venice keeps her treasure." And treasure it was. Venetian glass wasn't just fancy goblets. It was innovation after innovation. Crystal clear glass when the rest of Europe only managed cloudy lumps, intricate lace-like patterns frozen in silica, shimmering aventurine glass flecked with golden sparkles. These weren't trinkets, they were luxury exports, gifts for kings, bargaining chips for treaties. Venice understood perfectly well that the island of Murano was essentially a vault, except instead of gold bars, the wealth was knowledge. Historians still argue whether the fire safety excuse was ever sincere. Was the Senate genuinely worried about Venice burning down, or was it always about power, control, and monopoly? Either way, the effect was the same. You and your fellow artisans became prisoners of privilege. You were highly valued, yes, even pampered compared to a carpenter or baker. But your freedom? Gone, as surely as if you chained yourself to the glowing furnace. Here's the first quirky detail. Murano's laws were so strict that even your ashes were claimed by Venice. If you died on the island, your remains couldn't be carried back to Venice proper for burial. Cemeteries sprang up on Murano, filled with generations of glassmakers who never left, even in death. You didn't just work on the island, you merged with it, body and soul, until even the soil was part artisan, part glass. Morbid? Yes. Convenient for Venice? Absolutely. Now, imagine being a young apprentice stepping off the boat for the first time. The heat hits you instantly, like stepping into an oven. You hear the roar of bellows pumping air into the furnaces, smell burning wood and molten sand, and see grown men with arms like blacksmiths casually twirling glowing rods tipped with honey-like blobs of fire. It's mesmerizing, terrifying, and, in its way, beautiful. You want to learn. You want to belong. But you also know you've just walked into a cage lined with jewels. The Republic sweetened the exile, of course. They gave glassmakers certain privileges. Your children could marry into noble families, your taxes were lighter, your status was far above the average artisan. To the outside world, you seemed lucky, privileged, even envied. But every privilege was a leash, every perk a reminder that you were a prized possession, not a free citizen. Think of it like being gifted a golden iPhone that also, suspiciously, has no off switch and tracks your location at all times. There's a running joke whispered among apprentices: you don't so much join Murano as get kidnapped by it. Because once you step onto the island, you don't get to step off again, not without eyes following you, not without Venice deciding if you're allowed. You might laugh nervously at this joke while helping shovel sand into the furnace, but deep down, you know it's not really a joke at all. One more odd tidbit: Venetian authorities made a big show of publicly celebrating the glassmakers, even holding feasts and ceremonies to honor them. But behind the fanfare, spies lurked, making sure no one slipped away with a secret recipe. The duality was almost comical: you'd be toasted like royalty in the evening and followed like a criminal in the morning. You sit back now, the heat prickling your skin, listening to the hiss and roar of flames. You realize Venice created something brilliant, if sinister. A city within a city, an island that functioned both as workshop and prison, both jewel box and cage. And you are now part of this strange world, where fire is controlled, secrets are guarded, and even the glow of the furnaces whispers, "You belong to us." You wander deeper into the labyrinth of Murano, and tonight the glow of the furnaces feels almost like a congregation of suns. Inside one of the workshops, the masters gather, not to shape molten glass, but to shape words sworn as oaths, words that will bind them as tightly as the hottest iron. You lean against a wall, listening to the rhythmic hum of molten breath in the furnaces as these men raise their right hands. They are not swearing to a king or to a god, but to the Republic of Venice itself. Their oath is simple: never reveal the secrets of the glass. The idea sounds noble, almost cinematic: you, a craftsman, standing with calloused fingers and promising your loyalty to the glowing art. But it's also deadly serious. Break the oath, and you risk fines, exile, imprisonment, or worse. The Republic considered the formulas for glassmaking more valuable than gold coins, and spilling them was nothing short of treason. Imagine if Coca-Cola's recipe came with guards who were legally allowed to stab you for whispering it to someone in Florence. That's the level we're dealing with here. As you listen, the oath gets repeated in various dialects: Venetian, Latin, sometimes even Greek for older masters who never quite gave up their mother tongue. The ritual is heavy, thick with smoke, and the apprentices watching from the corner shift nervously. You can feel their hearts racing. After all, one day they'll have to swear the same thing. No one escapes this moment. The mainstream historical fact is this: Venetian records confirm that glassmakers were legally forbidden to share trade secrets. They weren't allowed to leave Murano without government permission, and if they did, bounty hunters would be sent after them. Think of it as medieval corporate non-disclosure agreements, except instead of lawyers sending you a letter, a masked agent might show up at your door with a dagger. Effective, if a little extreme. And here comes a quirk: these oaths weren't just legal, they were spiritualized. Some accounts suggest that masters swore not only on the honor of Venice but also on the relics of saints kept in local churches. Picture a craftsman balancing one hand on a glowing crucifix-shaped reliquary, the other raised in vow, with molten glass dripping just a few feet away. It's solemn, theatrical, and maybe just a little bit overkill. You almost expect a choir to burst into chant in the background. Historians still argue whether the Republic's threats were consistently enforced or whether most oaths were simply symbolic gestures. Some claim that glassmakers routinely passed secrets under the table, bribed guards, or smuggled knowledge to foreign courts in exchange for gold. Others insist Venice's surveillance network was airtight and that these oaths were like invisible chains clamped onto every artisan's soul. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the heat haze between. As you picture it, you can almost see the duality on every face in the room. A proud master bows his head to repeat the words, but his eyes flick toward his son, already calculating whether the boy might someday sneak a fragment of knowledge to a cousin abroad. A weary craftsman mutters the vow, but you catch him smirking. Does he really believe the Republic can stop words from spreading? And then there's the anxious apprentice in the back, wringing his hands, wondering if he's made a terrible life choice by stepping into this glowing cage of fire. The ceremony ends with a clap of hands and a cheerless toast of watered-down wine. No confetti, no fanfare, just men tightening their bonds to Venice with invisible rope. You shuffle out into the night air, the sound of the lagoon lapping against the docks, the oath still echoing in your ears. The smell of smoke clings to your clothes, and you realize something unsettling. The island itself feels like a contract. Every brick, every cobblestone, every wave that separates Murano from Venice seems to whisper the same thing. You are bound here. And yet, beneath the heaviness, there's a strange pride, too. These oaths, grim though they are, elevate the glassmakers into something sacred. They are more than artisans now, they are guardians of fire, custodians of a legacy so precious it must be sworn into silence. That paradox of fear and glory tangled together is what will keep you awake tonight, long after the furnaces dim. You step out of the workshop into the night air, but freedom, even here, is an illusion. You've heard whispers that the Republic's control doesn't end with oaths. If you ever tried to leave Murano without written permission, you'd be branded not just as a runaway artisan, but as a traitor to the state. You pause by the water, watching the glimmer of Venice on the horizon, so close you could swim it if you dared. But you know better. The lagoon isn't your barrier, the Republic is. The rule is clear: no glassmaker may leave Murano without explicit approval. Travel abroad? Forbidden. Even hopping over to Venice for a casual stroll is suspicious unless your name is recorded and your errand approved. It's like living in a beautiful resort where the gates are locked from the outside and every guard knows your face. Sure, you're treated with honor, but you're also being watched more closely than a teenager left home alone with Wi-Fi. The mainstream fact here is chilling. The Venetian government enforced this rule with teeth. Historical decrees from the Doge's council warned that deserters would be tracked, and in some cases, executed. The logic was brutal but effective. If a runaway shared the secret of cristallo glass or the techniques of mirror making with rival kingdoms, Venice's monopoly would crumble. It wasn't paranoia, it was economics wrapped in iron law. And here's your quirky tidbit: runaways weren't just punished themselves, sometimes their families were punished too. Imagine slipping away to Paris, thinking you've pulled off the heist of your life, only to find out later that Venice seized your brother's house, or fined your cousin into bankruptcy. Talk about long-distance guilt trips. It made the very idea of escape feel radioactive. You didn't just doom yourself, you doomed everyone who shared your last name. Historians still argue whether the infamous assassin's clause really existed, that shadowy rumor that the Republic sent agents across Europe to quietly dispose of runaway glassmakers. Some chronicles hint at mysterious deaths in Florence and Constantinople, while others dismiss these as convenient myths spread to frighten apprentices. The truth may never be provable, but the fear was real enough to keep most artisans rooted firmly to Murano's soil. Picture yourself pacing the docks one midnight, tempted by the sight of a ship bound for foreign shores. The creak of ropes, the slap of sails, the promise of freedom calling. And then you feel the weight of the oath you swore, the eyes of the Senate in your imagination, and perhaps even the cold shadow of a masked figure who might be waiting in that foreign port. You step back from the water. You go home. And so the rule works, not because guards drag you away, but because you drag yourself back into obedience. For a brief laugh in the darkness, you imagine what would happen if Murano's laws were enforced today. Picture a modern glass artist trying to fly from Venice Marco Polo Airport, only to have the gate agent say, "Sorry, sir, your boarding pass has been revoked. Venice prefers you don't teach fused glass workshops in Miami." Ridiculous, yes, but no more ridiculous than the reality of being held hostage by your own city for centuries. The night air cools your cheeks as you turn from the lagoon. Forbidden travel isn't just about geography, it's about ownership. Venice doesn't just own your craft, it owns your body, your movements, even your shadow. And as you step back into the glow of the furnaces, you know the truth. Every flame that shapes glass on Murano also burns away a little of your freedom. You sit on a worn stone bench outside the furnace hall, staring at the flicker of sparks drifting like fireflies. Around you, the talk is not of freedom but of family. Because if you can't leave Murano, your bloodline becomes the only road you're allowed to travel. Dynasties of glass rise here, stronger than steel chains, tighter than church cloisters. You realize quickly that knowledge isn't passed down like scribbled recipes on parchment, it's passed down through names. If you aren't born into the right family, your chances of mastering certain techniques are slimmer than a wine glass stem. Families such as the Barovias, the Ballerins, and the Serenas dominated Murano's furnaces for centuries. Their reputations glowed hotter than their furnaces, and their secrets were treated like royal heirlooms. You picture them at dinner tables, sliding cryptic advice across bread loaves. "Remember, child, never stir the batch counterclockwise after midnight." A joke, maybe, but in truth, these were households where glass was discussed with the same reverence as prayers. The mainstream fact is straightforward. Entire dynasties controlled the art of Venetian glassmaking, generation after generation, effectively monopolizing not only techniques but also workshop ownership. The Republic of Venice encouraged this, because keeping secrets inside families was easier than policing every apprentice with a suspiciously loose tongue. Blood loyalty is harder to bribe away. But here's your quirky nugget. Some families kept peculiar household traditions, half superstition, half security system. There are stories of recipes being sung as lullabies to infants, nonsense words to outsiders, but coded instructions to those who grew up with them. Picture a baby being rocked to sleep with "Hush now, little one, at the manganese when the moon is high. Sweet dreams, and also don't you dare tell the neighbors." Historians still argue whether dynasties genuinely advanced the art or whether they simply hoarded knowledge to maintain status. Did Venetian glass leap forward because Barovia sons were truly brilliant, or because outsiders were locked out of the game? The debate crackles like the furnace, unresolved. In practice, though, dynasties meant power. If you were born into the right family, you had a golden ladder to climb. If not, well, you might spend a lifetime blowing bubbles and shaping handles, never once allowed to touch the secret formulas for Cristallo. It was less a meritocracy, more a monopoly of surnames. And in Murano, your surname was the heaviest tool you carried. Think of the pressure inside those households. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, sitting at the edge of the furnace, watching his father coax a glowing orb into a chalice. He knows this is his destiny, that one day he'll inherit not only the workshop but also the burden of secrecy. The other apprentices envy him, but he feels the weight. Imagine wanting to be a poet or a sailor but being told, "No, son, your fate is to stir molten sand for the rest of your life, because your grandfather once invented a goblet everyone still talks about." Dreams are fragile here, more fragile than glass itself. Of course, dynasties also created rivalries. Families competed, whispered against each other, sometimes even sabotaged one another. A rumor of a cracked furnace or a spoiled batch might mysteriously spread, damaging reputations. You chuckle to yourself, high school drama, but with molten lava and Venetian spies lurking in the wings. One evening, you overhear a Barovia elder boasting that their clan's glass is so pure it makes water taste sweeter. Across the canal, a ballerine master rolls his eyes so hard you think they'll tumble into the lagoon. Pride, vanity, secrecy, they're all molten in the same crucible, shaping not only glass but also identity. And as you sit there, listening to the laughter, the gossip, the occasional argument carried on the sea breeze, you realize dynasties are Murano's truest glasswork, intricate, shimmering, and just as easy to shatter if handled carelessly. As you drift from the chatter of rival families, you stumble into another curious corner of Murano life: marriage. If glass shaped your work, it also shaped your love life. You quickly notice that who you marry here isn't just a matter of affection, it's practically a government-regulated business strategy. The rules surrounding glassmakers' unions were as peculiar as the furnaces themselves, binding people together for reasons that had little to do with romance and everything to do with secrecy. You sit by the canal, watching lanterns reflect on the water, and hear two masters gossiping about a recent wedding. It wasn't a simple love story, it was an alliance. Because glass families guarded their secrets, marriages were carefully engineered to keep knowledge inside trusted bloodlines. That meant sons and daughters were nudged, sometimes shoved, toward certain partners, not for compatibility but for utility. Here's the mainstream fact: Venetian glassmakers were granted unusual privileges when it came to marriage. They could marry into noble Venetian families, something most artisans could only dream of. This perk elevated glassmakers socially, tethering them closer to the aristocracy, and it added another layer of loyalty between Murano and Venice. The Republic wasn't just locking up techniques in furnaces, it was locking them into wedding vows. And here's the quirky tidbit: some families even created glass dowries, not sacks of coins, but promises of trade secrets or techniques delivered as part of the marriage package. Imagine a wedding toast where instead of clinking glasses, the father of the bride announces, "As part of this union, we bequeath to our new son-in-law the method for producing deep cobalt blue without cracks." Not exactly a fairy tale, but hey, it sparkled. Historians still argue whether these arranged matches actually strengthened Murano's monopoly or simply made family feuds more complicated. Did mixing rival families through marriage unify the island or just add fuel to domestic drama? The debate simmers like molten sand, unresolved but deliciously intriguing. You picture a young glassmaker's daughter standing on her balcony, staring wistfully at the horizon, maybe dreaming of a poet or sailor she'll never marry. Instead, she's steered into a match with the boy next door because his father guards the formula for a venture in glass. You almost want to slip her a note that says, "Run away to Florence," though you already know how that would end. Spoiler: badly, probably with Venetian agents rowing after her gondola. And yet, for all its control, marriage did sometimes spark genuine affection. Couples found joy, built homes, and raised children among the roar of the furnaces. Love bloomed in odd places, maybe over shared burns from a careless tool, or late-night walks when the furnaces had cooled. You realize that even in this cage of rules, people still found ways to carve little cracks of freedom, small spaces where laughter and tenderness could glow like molten glass. The deeper you sink into Murano's life, the more you realize it isn't all chains and oaths. Tonight, you wander past a palazzo-turned workshop and overhear laughter spilling into the night air. The glassmakers, though prisoners of Venice in some sense, enjoy privileges most artisans in Europe could never imagine. You step closer, peeking in at long tables spread with wine, olives, and roasted fish, and see men who spend their days sweating in fire now dining like nobles. The Republic rewarded its glassmakers handsomely for their loyalty. Here's the mainstream fact: Murano artisans were granted special rights, like wearing swords in public, a privilege usually reserved for nobility, and immunity from prosecution in certain minor offenses. They weren't common laborers, they were elevated, semi-noble craftsmen, treated with respect that outshone bakers, weavers, or even blacksmiths. Their products weren't just goblets, they were prestige items. So Venice ensured the men behind them felt as important as their glittering exports. And here's the quirky detail. Some glassmakers were so wealthy that their estates included exotic animals in their gardens, peacocks strutting near courtyards, or monkeys imported from distant trade routes. Imagine blowing a delicate goblet one moment and then, during lunch, shooing a mischievous monkey off your fruit bowl. It gives artisan lifestyle a whole new flavor. Historians still argue whether these privileges were a genuine attempt to honor the artisans or simply golden handcuffs, making Murano so comfortable that no one dared risk escape. Were the banquets and exemptions heartfelt gratitude from Venice, or clever tools of manipulation? You lean toward the latter, but either way, you can't deny the effect. Picture yourself walking down Murano's main street on a festival day. Children toss flowers into the canals, wives display shimmering jewelry made of millefiori beads, and glassmasters strut with their swords, basking in admiration. You, an outsider, might almost forget this place is a gilded cage. It looks like paradise, if you don't squint too hard at the bars. There's humor in it too. One night, a tipsy glassmaker brags about his exemption from certain taxes, only to get heckled by his own apprentice. Yes, master, but your nose is always red from the furnace. The workshop erupts in laughter. Privilege doesn't erase teasing, after all. As you watch these men raise goblets of their own craft, toasting not just to Venice but to themselves, you feel the contradiction settling on your shoulders. On Murano, you are both trapped and treasured, both prisoner and prince. And the glow of privilege, like molten glass, can burn just as easily as it dazzles. The banquet laughter fades behind you, and with it, the illusion of safety. Because outside those glowing halls, the word glass carries more danger than delight. Tonight you overhear a hushed conversation on the dock, two men leaning close, voices thick with fear, spies. They whisper of Florence, Paris, Constantinople, all hungry for Venice's secrets. You listen, heart thumping, realizing that Murano isn't just an island of artisans, it's a fortress under siege. The mainstream fact is stark. Rival kingdoms desperately wanted Murano's formulas. Venetian glass, especially Cristallo, clear and flawless, was unmatched. Courts in France, Spain, and even the Ottoman Empire sent emissaries and agents to lure artisans away or to bribe apprentices. Some spies posed as merchants, others as lovers, still others as innocent travelers just curious about your lovely chandeliers. But beneath the compliments lay greed sharper than any dagger. And here's your quirky tidbit. Records suggest one French king sent agents disguised as musicians to Murano, carrying lutes instead of ledgers, hoping their serenades would soften artisans into sharing secrets. Imagine a lute player crooning beneath a workshop window, not for romance, but for recipes. It's both absurd and oddly charming, like espionage directed by a street performer. Historians still argue whether Venice truly dispatched assassins to deal with stolen secrets, or whether the rumors were deliberately spread to terrify glassmakers into obedience. Were certain suspicious drownings in the Seine or sudden illnesses in Florence the work of Venetian daggers, or just bad luck dressed up as political theater? The debate still flickers, unresolved. You picture yourself one evening walking along Murano's quiet canals and spotting a stranger, foreign clothes slightly too fine, eyes lingering a beat too long on the furnaces. Do you nod politely, or run to tell your master? The paranoia is real, heavy as lead. Everyone on Murano learns to watch for spies the way you watch for sparks near dry wood. And the stories keep the fear alive. An apprentice tells you of a master lured to Milan with promises of riches, only to vanish from the chronicles. Another tale speaks of a smuggled formula scrawled inside the lining of a cloak, carried out under the nose of Venetian guards. Whether truth or legend, you're left uneasy, realizing that every goblet raised in a banquet might be a beacon for thieves abroad. So you walk faster tonight, shadows stretching long across the canals, the laughter of nobles behind you and the imagined footsteps of spies ahead. Murano glitters. Yes, but it glitters because enemies are always watching. The paranoia of spies lingers in your mind as you slip into the guild hall, where justice for glassmakers is handled not with juries and witnesses, but with whispered hearings and shadowy punishments. The room is dim, the air thick with smoke, and the faces around you glow with the reflection of the furnace flames outside. This is no ordinary court. It is the guild's own tribunal, and tonight you watch artisans being judged not for theft or violence, but for betraying the peculiar rules of Murano itself. The mainstream fact is this: the Art dei Vetri, the Glassmakers Guild, maintained strict authority over its members, with power to fine, exile, or even imprison those who broke rules. Their trials were insular, private, often faster than any civic court. Break the oath, leak a recipe, or undercut a rival's price, and you'd find yourself standing before your peers, sweating more from fear than from the furnace heat. And here's the quirky tidbit: punishments sometimes included fines not in coin, but in glass. An offender might be ordered to produce dozens of goblets for the guild without pay, a kind of artisanal community service. Imagine being grounded by your peers and told, "No money for you, just go make 50 crystal wine glasses by sunrise." Effective, if exhausting. Historians still argue whether the guild's darker punishments, rumored disappearances of offending members, were sanctioned by Venice or simply covered up by complicit silence. Did men truly vanish into the lagoon because they whispered too freely, or are these just ghost stories told by nervous apprentices? The truth is murky, like water stirred with ash. You lean against the wall as a case unfolds. A young apprentice is accused of sneaking notes about formulas into a sailor's satchel. His master insists it was a mistake, the boy only scribbling drawings of boats. But the judges, faces grim as cooled glass, don't laugh. The sentence is a heavy fine and years more servitude. The boy's shoulders slump, but at least he still walks out alive. As the tribunal disperses, you hear murmurs, rumors of other cases where men didn't return home, where canals swallowed secrets along with bodies. The silence that follows is louder than any gavel. In Murano, justice isn't blind, it's molten, shaped to protect the Republic above all. You walk back into the night, unease knotting your stomach. The furnaces roar on, indifferent, as if mocking your fear. And you realize, on Murano, the glow of fire is beautiful, but the glow of judgment is terrifying. You leave the guild hall with your nerves frayed, but the next morning, you're called to handle something far shinier than fear: mirrors. Venice's most guarded treasure isn't a goblet or a chandelier, it's the glittering sheets of reflection that have dazzled courts across Europe. You step into a workshop where sunlight slants across rows of polished glass, each pane gleaming like a trapped piece of sky. The masters hover over them with reverence, as though handling relics. The mainstream fact is this: Venetian mirrors of the 16th and 17th centuries were unmatched in clarity and brilliance, thanks to cristallo glass and a secret mercury amalgam technique. For decades, only Murano could produce them, making Venetian mirrors more coveted than jewels. Kings, queens, and cardinals schemed to own them, and entire rooms in palaces were lined with the shimmering luxury. The Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, born of stolen Venetian secrets. Here's the quirky detail: in some courts, mirrors were considered so magical that people used them for fortune-telling. One tale tells of a duchess who refused to dine without a Venetian mirror at her side, claiming it kept away evil spirits. Imagine dragging a 4-foot reflective slab into a candlelit feast, just in case a ghost decided to ruin dessert. Historians still argue whether the monopoly on mirrors was maintained more by secrecy or intimidation. Were Venetian artisans truly unique in skill, or did Venice simply frighten rivals into submission until French and German workshops finally broke the code? The debate reflects, pun intended, like light bouncing endlessly across glass. You watch a master tilt a finished pane toward you, and your own tired face stares back. For a moment, you marvel. This isn't just a mirror, it's a weapon of status. Each piece is guarded by rules fiercer than any fortress wall. Even touching one feels like handling contraband. And yet, behind the brilliance, you see fear. Whispers abound of spies smuggling artisans to France, of men vanishing after whispering too much about mercury recipes. You step back from the reflection, suddenly unsure if the person in the mirror is you or the version of you Venice demands you to be. You linger near the furnaces long after the mirrors have been polished, and whispers rise again, not of politics this time, but of powers unseen. On Murano, glass isn't just craft, it is magic, alchemy, and superstition woven into molten sand. You crouch near the flames, feeling the heat press against your skin, and hear an apprentice murmur that the furnaces burn with souls, that each spark carries a blessing or a curse depending on how you stir the mixture. The mainstream fact is clear enough. Renaissance Venice was steeped in alchemical thought. Glassmakers weren't only artisans, they were sometimes treated like proto-alchemists, experimenting with minerals and metals, chasing colors, clarity, and even the fabled philosopher's stone. Recipes for ruby glass read like spells, adding gold powder, whispering prayers, waiting for fire to transmute the ordinary into the extraordinary. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some masters carried little charms to protect against furnace accidents, amulets, bits of bone, even odd powders they'd sprinkle into the flames for good luck. One rumor tells of crocodile dung being dried and tossed into furnaces as protection against explosions. Imagine explaining to your apprentice, "Don't worry, the secret ingredient is, well, let's just say the Nile sent us a gift." You can't help but laugh at the absurdity, though the superstition is deadly earnest. Historians still argue whether glassmakers truly believed their work tapped into mystical forces or whether the rituals were just a way of coping with the constant danger. Was alchemy woven into the craft, or simply a comforting theater to make endless burns and scars seem purposeful? The debate flickers like firelight, uncertain and shifting. One evening, as the flames roar higher, you watch a master trace a symbol in ash on the floor, muttering words you don't quite catch. His apprentices bow their heads, solemn, as though a priest has spoken. You realize that for them, the furnace is a church, the crucible an altar, and glass itself a miracle shaped by both human hand and hidden powers. As you leave, the glow follows you, warm and eerie. Whether it's science, superstition, or something in between, you understand now why Murano's secrets were guarded so fiercely. They weren't just techniques. To those who practiced them, they were magic itself. You return to the furnaces expecting to see the usual scene of men with blackened arms and sweat dripping into molten glass, but tonight something catches your eye: women. It's unusual, almost jarring. Murano's rules and traditions had long painted the craft as a man's domain, yet here you glimpse women's shadows moving just beyond the firelight. They are not supposed to be here, and yet they are. The mainstream fact is that, officially, Venetian guild statutes excluded women from becoming masters of glassmaking. The trade was a jealously guarded fraternity, passed through fathers and sons, uncles and nephews. But unofficially, women found ways to slip through the cracks, often as assistants, decorators, or bead makers. In particular, Murano's famous glass beads, those tiny, colorful jewels traded across continents, were often the product of women's patient hands. And here's the quirky tidbit: stories survive of women disguising themselves to work at the furnace, wrapping scarves around their heads and pretending to be young boys. In one tale, a girl managed to apprentice for months before anyone noticed, until an unfortunate accident with a molten drip revealed her long hair. You can almost imagine the scene: panic, shouts, maybe even a scolding that began with creative initiative, but let's not try that again. Historians still argue whether women genuinely contributed to technical innovations or whether their labor was quietly erased from the records. Did they invent patterns, refine bead-making methods, or perhaps discover color blends, only to have their brothers or fathers claim the credit? Or were they simply relegated to repetitive, unrecognized tasks? The debate remains smoky, elusive, just like the figures you glimpse tonight by the fire. You watch one woman carefully string beads, her fingers deft, her concentration absolute. Though she doesn't blow into the long iron pipe, her work is vital. Traders carry her beads to Africa, to the Americas, to markets so far away she can't even imagine them. Her hands, anonymous though they may be, shape global exchange as surely as any master at the furnace. Later, as you pass down an alley, you hear the clink of glass bangles worn by wives and daughters, gifts forged from scraps of molten leftovers. Love tokens, ornaments, perhaps even secret experiments. The women of Murano may be shadows in the official records, but their presence rings clear in the music of glass all around you. And you smile, realizing that history, like glass, sometimes hides patterns until the light hits at just the right angle. You've grown used to the sight of dynasties protecting their secrets and the rare glimpse of women slipping into the story, but now you encounter another class of figures who color Murano's tale: outsiders and apprentices. Tonight you wander through the alleys and hear a knock at the guild's door. It's a foreigner, dusty from travel, clutching a letter of introduction. His eyes shine with desperation. He has come from far away, begging for a chance to learn the island's magic. The mainstream fact is this: outsiders were rarely admitted to Murano's guild, and even apprentices from Venice itself had to pass strict vetting. The Senate feared that too many new hands might loosen the Republic's grip. When foreigners were allowed in, it was usually under surveillance, often as hostages to Venice's diplomacy as much as students of glass. But here's the quirky tidbit: some apprentices endured bizarre initiation rituals, equal parts hazing and tradition. One account describes boys being forced to carry buckets of furnace ash on their heads while reciting oaths backward. Another hints at apprentices being sent into the lagoon at night to fetch cooled shards from the mud, like treasure hunters in filthy water. You chuckle at the image, half rite of passage, half prank at the expense of wide-eyed newcomers. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuine or exaggerated by later storytellers. Were they actual tests of loyalty and endurance, or just the exaggerated memories of old men puffing up their youth? Perhaps both, truth and embellishment fused together like colored threads in glass. You follow the foreign hopeful as he's turned away, his shoulders sagging. For every apprentice allowed in, dozens were rejected, left to sail back home with nothing but dreams. Meanwhile, those who were admitted endured years of grinding labor, tending furnaces, fetching tools, sweeping shards, before they were trusted with even the simplest blowpipe. It was a system designed not only to train but to humble. Inside one workshop, you see apprentices sprawled on benches after a long night, arms blistered, eyelids heavy. They joke among themselves, by the time we're masters, we'll be too tired to lift the glass, and burst into weary laughter. Still, their eyes gleam with pride. For them, the struggle is worth it. To join Murano's brotherhood is to join immortality, their names etched into fire and memory. As you leave the workshop, the sound of their laughter lingers, tinged with both exhaustion and hope. You realize apprentices are the lifeblood of Murano. They arrive as strangers, are tested like soldiers, and emerge, if they survive the furnace, bound to the island forever. You wake to shouts echoing across the canals. Word spreads quickly: another glassmaker has tried to flee. The island buzzes with rumor. He slipped out under cover of darkness, perhaps bribing a boatman, perhaps hiding beneath sacks of grain. But by dawn, Venetian agents were already rowing hard across the lagoon. On Murano, escape stories always end the same way, badly. The mainstream fact is grim. Glassmakers who fled without permission faced severe punishment. Records describe men hunted down across Europe, sometimes lured back with false promises of pardon, sometimes dragged in chains. If captured, they might lose their property, their citizenship, even their lives. Venice didn't gamble with its monopoly. And here's your quirky tidbit. A few successful runaways tried disguises as absurd as they were desperate. One tale speaks of a master dressing as a Franciscan monk, another of an apprentice shaved bald to pose as a pilgrim. Picture a stern Venetian inquisitor staring suspiciously at a man muttering psalms, while secretly clutching notes about crystallo glass in his sleeve. Theatrics worthy of a comedy, except the stakes were deadly serious. Historians still argue whether Venice truly executed deserters as ruthlessly as legend claims. Some sources insist that death sentences were rare, exaggerated later to frighten apprentices. Others argue the opposite, that quiet killings and accidents erased defectors from history. The truth is as slippery as mercury on a mirror's surface. You imagine yourself on a moonless night, slipping into a gondola, heart hammering. The water is calm, but your ears strain for any sound. Oars behind you, whispers on the wind. Even if you reached Florence or Paris, would you ever sleep soundly again, knowing Venetian daggers might be waiting? One apprentice jokes nervously, better to burn your hands in the furnace than your neck at the gallows. The others laugh too loudly, because humor is the only shield against fear. As dawn breaks, you see soldiers patrolling the docks, their eyes scanning every face. Murano feels smaller than ever, its canals less like passageways and more like chains of water. And you know this truth. For a glassmaker, escape is the most dangerous art of all. The mood on the island is tense after the attempted escape, but life carries on, and the furnaces keep roaring. You drift into a warehouse where crates are stacked high, waiting to be loaded onto ships. The air smells of pitch and sea brine, and suddenly the scope of Murano's trade hits you. These aren't just pretty trinkets for local nobles, this is an empire of glass, feeding Europe's hunger for luxury. The mainstream fact is that by the 16th century, Murano glass was exported across the continent and beyond. Chandeliers dangled in Polish palaces, mirrors crossed into France, and beads traveled even further, used in trade networks stretching into Africa and the Americas. Glass was Venice's passport to global influence, more enduring than its dwindling naval power. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some Venetian merchants literally insured their shipments by hiding saints' relics in crates of glassware. Imagine prying open a box expecting goblets and finding a finger bone of Saint Mark tucked inside like bubble wrap. Supposedly it worked, sailors swore storms parted around holy cargo, though skeptics might say coincidence and luck did the heavy lifting. Historians still argue whether Venice's glass dominance was truly global or whether we overstate it because the surviving pieces are so dazzling. Did Venetian goods truly flood the farthest markets, or did local imitations and rival workshops quickly compete? The debate floats unresolved, like ships fading into a horizon of fog. As you help roll a crate toward the dock, you notice the workers treat the contents like treasure. A single chandelier might be worth more than a fisherman's lifetime earnings. Guards keep watch, pickpockets lurk, even the gondoliers glance nervously at the glittering bundles. The crates are hoisted aboard, sails unfurl, and soon the lagoon is dotted with ships carrying Murano's glow into the world. You watch them slip away, tiny flecks against the sea, and it feels as though the island is bleeding sparks of its soul across the globe. For you, the message is clear. Murano's rules aren't only about control at home, they're about projecting Venice's brilliance everywhere, one fragile cargo at a time. The ships vanish into the horizon, their sails glowing with the last light of day, and you turn back toward the furnaces that never rest. On Murano, Time doesn't move in neat centuries but in cycles of fire. Generations rise, stir the molten river, shape their chandeliers, and then fade, leaving behind nothing but fragile beauty. The mainstream fact is this: by the 18th century, Murano's supremacy began to wane. French, Bohemian, and English glassmakers, once students and imitators, became rivals, often surpassing Venetian wares in size or innovation. Yet Murano never disappeared. Instead, it doubled down on artistry, crafting elaborate filigree and delicate sculptural forms no one else could match. The Republic of Venice itself would fall to Napoleon, but the island's furnaces outlived the empire that once guarded them with swords. And here's your quirky tidbit: some masters developed such ego about their lineage that they signed their glass as if they were royalty, complete with invented coats of arms. One even insisted his drinking cups healed headaches if sipped from at dawn, part advertisement, part wishful thinking. You imagine buyers raising their goblets and muttering, "Well, I'm still hungover, but at least it's stylish." Historians still argue whether Murano's decline was caused more by political collapse, shifting trade routes, or sheer exhaustion of secrecy. Was the island doomed the moment knowledge leaked, or was Venice itself the true brittle thing, cracking under pressure while its glass survived? The question drifts like ash from a cooling furnace, impossible to pin down, but strangely comforting to watch. As you wander through the island one last time, you hear echoes of apprentices laughing, women stringing beads, masters whispering prayers over furnaces, and merchants weighing chandeliers like treasure. The peculiar rules, banishments, privileges, punishments cling to the air. Yet beneath them all, the hum of creativity remains, stubborn as molten sand refusing to turn back into dust. And so the cycle continues, even now. Each piece of Murano glass you glimpse in a shop window or a museum case carries whispers of this island, of fire that bound people tighter than chains, of secrets kept and sometimes lost. You feel as if you've been wandering a dream where glass breathes, and maybe you have. The story softens, like coals cooling into a deep, gentle glow. The voices of the island fade into a lullaby of water lapping against stone, furnaces sighing into silence, and moonlight trembling across canals. The rules, the rivalries, the magic all blur into a distant shimmer, as if you are looking through glass one last time, watching it bend the world into something strange and beautiful. You let your shoulders relax, your breath slow, and the heat of the fires ebb into warmth that soothes rather than burns. Picture the island growing still, its secrets tucked safely into shadows, its brilliance resting until morning. There is nothing more to chase tonight. Only the quiet glow remains. Sweet dreams, traveler.